All right, guys, today I'm going to talk to you about the fake version of the greenhouse effect, which climate science and climate physics and climate change and anthropogenic climate change and climate alarm is all based upon. They have this fake version of a greenhouse effect. It doesn't exist. They stole the phrase greenhouse from a real greenhouse building, a greenhouse effect in a real building. They stole that concept and invented an entirely new scheme for their own thing that they've created, this pseudoscience of flat earth climate alarmism, flat earth climate physics, flat earth in modern physics, in other words. So here we're familiar with this diagram that I've shown you guys several times now. It's this one in particular is from Harvard, and it just shows their flat earth physics for their flat earth climate change models, their flat earth justification for anthropogenic climate change that they base on flat earth theory. So it's all total pseudoscience. And it's from this diagram and models like this where they have a flat earth and they spread the sunshine over the entire surface area of the earth at once. It's from there, that point, that they create this thing that they called a greenhouse effect, where the atmosphere provides twice as much heat to the earth than the sun does. So all total pseudoscience, and they call this part right here, because they have this freezing cold sunshine that can't create the climate, so then they make the climate create itself with these fancy little arrows that they drew in here, so brilliant and smart. And that's what they call their greenhouse effect, to create the climate, so that the climate can create itself. I'm just looking at a couple of robins picking some worms out of the lawn right over there. Hi, little robin. You having some lunch? Cute. All right, so let's go. I'm going to show you the real greenhouse effect, how a real greenhouse actually functions. So here is a real greenhouse. Here's a real greenhouse building. So what is the process that actually makes a real greenhouse warmer than the air outside of it? So you have the sunlight falling inside, passing through the glass ceiling of the greenhouse building, and it comes in and it warms the surfaces inside the greenhouse, because as we know, in fact, in reality, sunshine is quite warm. You can warm things on the surface, not just to 50 degrees Celsius, but quite warm indeed. It's too warm to even walk upon. It's so hot in the summertime. So you have warm sunlight generating high temperatures inside the greenhouse. Now the air in contact with those surfaces which get warmed up, that air rises because warm air rises, but is stopped from rising by the glass ceiling of the greenhouse. I just drew this a little squiggly little arrow in here and these squiggly little lines to show that this is air trying to rise, and you call that convection. That air is trying to convect away because warm air rises, but it gets stopped by the ceiling. And so this building traps warm air inside of it, traps this air that's warmed inside of itself. But what happens outside of the greenhouse? What's happening differently outside of the greenhouse? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? Outside of the greenhouse, the air that's in contact with the surface out here, outside of the greenhouse, and gets warmed up by contact with that surface from sunlight, warming that surface up to quite a high temperature. As you know, you stand on asphalt or sand on a beach, or just the ground, sand anywhere, the ground is getting warmed up to quite warm and high temperatures by sunlight directly. So that air rises away, and outside it just keeps rising. It goes away, and because it rises, then cool air falls down and replaces it. So you actually get a mix of warm air rising being replaced with cool air falling, and that creates convection and turbulence and all sorts of things like that. But in general, what the process is you're keeping the air down here cooler, because the air that's warmed rises away, goes up into the sky, and gets replaced with cooler air. Inside this building, this greenhouse building, that process that happens outside, which we call convection, does not work, which we call convective cooling. Outside the building, you call that convective cooling. So it's a cooling mechanism. And cooling, of course, what does that do? Creates cooler temperatures, right? So that convective cooling outside of the greenhouse building cannot function inside the greenhouse building, or at least it functions to a drastically limited effect, that the convection can only occur to the ceiling of the greenhouse. And because that's such a small volume, the air inside that greenhouse compared to outside can be warmed up to a much higher temperature. And so that's how a real greenhouse functions. And the temperature, importantly, inside this greenhouse will never get warmer, obviously, than the temperature at which it is being heated by sunlight. How can you rise to a temperature warmer than what you're being heated at? Obviously, you can't, right? So that's how a real greenhouse functions. The limiting temperature inside a greenhouse is given by the temperature at which it is being heated at, and it doesn't exceed that temperature. And it becomes warm because sunlight is quite warm, and sunlight does have enough power to drive and create the climate. And so that's why the inside of a greenhouse gets warm. The air cannot convect away. The warm air gets trapped inside. It cannot diffuse out into the rest of the atmosphere. And so it stays warm inside indeed. Now here is the fake version of the greenhouse effect that they created for climate alarmism in order to teach you flat earth theory, in order to trick you into believing in flat earth theory without you, and perhaps even them, realizing it. So in the fake greenhouse effect, just move that off me, you have sunshine coming in, but sunshine is coming in at a potentially much colder temperature in the case of the model that they have for the Earth, the flat Earth model. The temperature, the heating potential of sunlight is only coming in at minus 18 degrees Celsius. And so what they have is they make it an effect from light and radiation. Here, just go back to here for a second. This is a physical effect. You're trapping physical warmed air. You're physically trapping warmed air, material. You're trapping warmed material, air. Okay, so here the light comes in, and it comes in only at minus 18 degrees Celsius, so it can only create very cold surfaces. It can only raise surfaces up to minus 18 degrees Celsius. But this cold radiation then gets blocked by this roof, and this cold radiation comes back to itself and creates its own temperature and creates its own climate, just like they did here, where the climate creates itself with its own energy. Here in this real greenhouse, they're saying that the greenhouse creates its own temperature, basically with its own temperature, with its own energy. It creates its own higher temperature. So basically they're adding two cold temperatures together in order to generate a higher temperature. It's basically like adding two ice cubes together. It's like what happens if you smush two ice cubes together. They're saying that you should be able to add the temperatures of the two ice cubes together. Obviously that doesn't happen. The temperature of the two ice cubes stays the temperature that they're at, right? Temperatures don't add. So this climate science greenhouse effect. So here, one of the big differences is that the temperature that this should generate inside the greenhouse is actually more and higher than the temperature at which it is being heated. The temperature here in the physical real greenhouse effect, the temperature can't exceed the temperature at which it's being heated. Here it can. Now there's no reason why this process that they created here for this atmosphere model, it should also work for a real greenhouse building. It should function in a real greenhouse building. But guess what? It doesn't. A real greenhouse building functions this way. And this process of how radiation should come back, light should come back from the ceiling, infrared radiation should come back from the ceiling and generate a higher temperature of its own accord, that this greenhouse should be able to generate a higher temperature climate than the sunlight that it's being heated at. That process should work here because it's the same thing. You should be able to apply the same physics because physics is universal. But guess what? That doesn't function here. It's not functioning in a real greenhouse effect. So what does that show you? It's empirical proof that their greenhouse effect, that they stole this name of a real greenhouse and applied it to their flat earth physics where the climate creates itself. This thing doesn't exist because it should exist in a real greenhouse. That's how a real greenhouse should be able to function as well, but it doesn't. A real greenhouse only functions by trapping warmed air by stopping convective cooling. This process does not happen in a real greenhouse, and so it's empirical proof because a real greenhouse should be able to generate higher temperatures than the temperature at which it is being heated according to climate alarm physics. But that doesn't happen. So you actually have worldwide empirical proof in the form of real greenhouses, which show that the climate alarm flat earth greenhouse effect of climate physics and modern science doesn't actually exist. And why doesn't it exist? Why doesn't this scheme of the climate physics greenhouse effect work? Well, because it's all based on unreality, because it's based on starting with a flat earth. It's based on starting with sunshine spread over the entire surface area of the earth at once, which doesn't physically exist ever as an average, or that has no meaning whatsoever. And then because they make those errors or those frauds or commit those mistakes, then they create a scheme where the climate must create itself, and then they call that the greenhouse effect. Well, none of that exists, does it? And the consequences of what they created and derived their fake greenhouse effect obviously doesn't exist either. They just created it for this fiction, for these fictional starting points that they had. And then they stole a real greenhouse, the label of a real greenhouse. They stole that name and applied it to their invented flat earth physics. So it's complete and utter fraud. Complete and utter fraud, complete and utter stupid science. Pseudoscience, in other words. Here's another difference. The warm air rises, and you get this sort of a scheme where obviously the top should still be warmer because that's where the warmest air is, and then it would get cooler down towards the bottom. In their scheme, a greenhouse would have the opposite temperature distribution. In their scheme, the ceiling of the greenhouse effect should be coldest, and the bottom should be warmest. So that doesn't happen in a real greenhouse either. The top is warmest. The ceiling is warmest in a real greenhouse, and lower to the ground is cooler. So and I mean, of course, you expect everything to be wrong. Everything that they say, everything that they interpret, obviously, is going to be wrong because they start with these wrong, what I call boundary conditions or initial conditions, starting point of a flat earth with cold sunshine spread over the entire surface area of the earth at once. So there you go. That's the fake greenhouse effect versus the real greenhouse effect. That's the fake climate science greenhouse effect of modern climate physics, of modern physics, which you find in modern textbooks, which you find real PhDs in physics defending flat earth theory, when all of this stuff is just like there's no foundation to it whatsoever. It's flat earth theory. It refutes itself empirically and theoretically on so many different and obvious levels, very obvious levels. It's the simplest and dumbest thing in the world. I mean, anyone can look at this and say, this is ridiculous, this is stupid. I mean, when I show regular people this, and I just mean regular so-called working class people, you know, the people who actually sustain civilization, they identify this and they say, oh yeah, once you see past the intimidating math and physics there, yeah, you can see that's flat earth. Well, that's obviously garbage, right? Physicists, for some reason, can't do that. Scientists can't do that. They say, no, it's okay. No, it's okay to have flat earth. No, it's okay to say that the atmosphere provides twice the heat to the sun, or twice the heat to the earth than the sun does. It's okay to have flat earth theory. Isn't that amazing? It's the weirdest thing that you get PhDs in physics defending literal flat earth theory. A literal flat line. A literal flat line that is supposed to depict the whole surface of the earth at once. It's the strangest thing. Okay, and then here's the real greenhouse effect. Real greenhouse effect works by stopping convection. That's the real greenhouse effect. The climate pseudoscientists have stolen that word and invented this alternative scheme. All right, so I hope that was helpful. If you want me to go over any other more points, let me know in the comments and I can redo more videos. I'm going to keep doing these now, and I'll repeat things as much as I need to. So don't worry about wanting things repeated and done all over again, because I'll be more than happy to do it. All right, another beautiful day out there. The robins are eating worms. Maybe I should go check my garden, pull some weeds. Okay, take care, guys. Bye.